very much so. It's crazy. Okay.
Where's sanity? Is that weird? It's weird. That is weird. You're weird.
Yeah, I own it though. See,
Where's sanity?
That's the deal. Okay, so FDA, we talked about the trials, regulates drug manufacturing, and it also regulates drug shipped between states because, well, it's marijuana may be legal in Colorado, but it's not in Nebraska. So not only can you get criminal charges, but could you get federal charges if they chose to? I mean, right now they're not, but they could.
Well, they probably would, just because a lot of states are so angry. Like Wyoming, they just pull you over with a Colorado license plate. Like, you could have no other reason other than you have a Colorado license.
They'll wait for you to mess up. So they have, yeah.
It's just annoying. So some states get really mad about it. So I could see it being pressed federally.
Eventually, yeah. With the FDA, if they approve a formula, you must use that exact formula. If you change one little thing, you have to go through the whole approval process again. Mm-hmm. So I believe it was a Vioxx, which is a COX-2 inhibitor, so it's an anti-inflammatory. With Vioxx, they found that it could cause cardiac issues. Like people who had cardiovascular disease didn't do well on Vioxx, it caused heart attacks. So if they wanted to go in and just remove the part of it that caused the heart attacks, they would have to go through FDA approval again. The manufacturers of Vioxx just pulled it off the market. Celebrex is still on the market. Same category of drug, also a COX-2 inhibitor, but the way that they make it doesn't have the cardiovascular implications that the Vioxx did. However, Celebrex had a little tiny sulfa side chain on it. So people who had sulfa allergies couldn't take it. So the second generation of Celebrex, they went in and they removed that sulfa side chain and had to go through the approval process again. Okay, so the FDA says you can use this formulation and this formulation only, and if you tweak it, you have to be reapproved. Okay. The FDA regulates quality of ingredients. I'm actually very thankful for the FDA. A lot of people think that, you know, the FDA is too cumbersome, but after seeing Elixir of Death, I'm pretty okay with them testing things.
I don't remember that. I don't remember ever going.
Maybe you didn't get to see it. It was elixir sulfanilamide was an antibiotic. Well, sulfanilamide's an antibiotic. Mm-hmm. They only had it in powdered form, so they used it on the battlefields and stuff, and it was excellent. It was a lifesaver. But they could never figure out how to make it into a liquid form. It just wasn't stable, and so Massengill Company hired a guy, and he's like, oh, I can put it in to a liquid form that kids will take, and it'll be a miracle cure. But he mixed it with something that was the cousin to antifreeze.
Oh.
And so he killed, you saw that, 127, something like that, kids, people, and children. Because, number one, he didn't do any animal trials. If he'd done any animal trials, he would have realized that he was killing the animals like that. I mean, the cure was way worse than the disease at this point. So after seeing that, and the only thing they could get the Massengill Company on, because they didn't have the FDA at that time, was that he called it an elixir, and an elixir technically has alcohol in it, and his mixture had no alcohol. Oh. So, you know, you kill 100 and some people with a drug because you don't test it, I'll take the FDA any day. You know. The FDA regulates over-the-counter drugs and behind-the-counter drugs. Prescription drugs regulates the pregnancy categories, which we talked about earlier. So fetal risk is what they're looking at. Okay. We talked about fetal risk. Most drugs are category C, meaning they might be safe. We're not 100% sure. When you're pregnant, you can really take just maybe 5 different drugs. You can take some Benadryl. You can take some Sudafed, some Tylenol, some Advil. Pretty much that's it when you're pregnant. You just got to gut through all your illnesses when you're pregnant.
My sister's doctor told her that she can't take anything but, like, she can take Tylenol, but, like, no other, like, pain meds, and Tylenol doesn't work for her.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like,
yeah, you have to just completely gut through it. Because the placenta, you know, as important as the placenta is, it is so bad at filtering things. I mean, its job is to bring blood and nutrients to the fetus, but it does a really bad job of filtering out bad things. Yeah. So, prescription medications include controlled substances. The FDA oversees, oversees some of the complementary and alternative therapies, but it doesn't oversee things that you pick up at like natural grocers. Okay, those are self-regulated. The NDA, the new drug approval, requires that drugs are tested for safety and efficacy. And before that whole sulfanilamide thing happened, you've heard of the term snake oil salesman, right? Yeah. Okay. So people used to, back in the wild, wild west, used to sell drugs that they would say would cure everything. And they called them snake oil salesmen. So you could get liquid morphine. It wasn't regulated. You could just go get it. Laudanum was probably the biggest one that people used because it was a really good cough suppressant. It's an excellent cough suppressant. It's also highly addictive and will kill you, but you could just go up to the pharmacy, the apothecary, and buy laudanum. Or you go to the traveling salesman that comes through and buy it for mail order. It's crazy before we had the FDA. But they also, so the snake oil salesman would sell you pretty much anything and say it's going to cure this or it's going to cure that. But they didn't have to prove it before the FDA. So now the FDA has to make sure that drugs are safe and effective. Okay. So we do toxicology tests on animals. If the animals do okay, then we do control clinical trials on humans. First, we do it on healthy people to make sure that it's not toxic. And then we will do it on people who have the disease we're trying to treat to make sure it's effective. So the safety and efficacy come from the clinical trials. Then they look at the benefits versus risks. We look at what's going to be a safe dose, what is a therapeutic dose. So if 1 milligram doesn't give you any relief from your symptoms, but 10 milligrams does, now we come up with what the therapeutic dose is going to be. But if 10 milligrams is therapeutic and helps the symptoms, but 12 milligrams kills your liver, now we're starting to get into the margin of safety type stuff. Okay. If it is safe and effective, and this takes 12 to 15 years to go through this whole process. If it's safe and effective, then they will approve it for market. Even after a drug goes to market, though, they will follow it to make sure that we don't have any further issues with it. Because a lot of times, even though the clinical or the third trials of clinical trials, even though that's big, we're talking populations of thousands of people, that's still not the same as a nationwide thing. So once a drug goes to market, we may see that there are some issues with it, and either the manufacturer can voluntarily pull it, like what happened with Biops. It was safe and effective in all of the clinical trials, but then it went to market, and they started seeing this issue with cardiovascular disease and heart attack on people with Biops. So the manufacturer pulled it on their own. The FDA didn't tell them they had to pull it. But even after a drug goes to market, it's still fairly scrutinized. Okay. After it goes to market, you may find new indications. Like with the Benadryl thing, you may find that Benadryl's great for antihistamine stuff, stops the itching, but it also makes you tired. So we've got this new indication. We take that diphenhydramine chloride and now we put it in Tylenol and we call it Tylenol PM. So your aches and pains go away and you sleep better. Okay, so that would be a new indication for diphenhydramine. Over-the-counter proposals, after it's been out on market a while, if it's safe, it can become over-the-counter. Then the drug company can ask for it to become over-the-counter. Prilosec, I remember when Prilosec and Zyrtec and Claritin, all of those drugs were prescription only. And they've been in medicine a long time, but it seems like they were prescription for about 2 years before they applied for it to be over-the-counter. And now you can buy pretty much all allergy medications over the counter. Mm-hmm. I remember when Advil was prescription only. Now, that was at the very beginning of my career. It was in the mid to late 80s when Advil was prescription only. And now we kind of scoff at that. Why would it be? We pretty much eat Advil like candy. But at the time, it was pretty strictly regulated. Okay. If there's an adverse effect, they may withdraw it from market. And it could be voluntary or it could be mandated by the FDA. Most manufacturers, if they see a problem, in order to avoid lawsuits, will voluntarily take a drug off the market. Because if they know that they're starting to see bad things happening, like with the Vioxx and the heart attacks, if we can identify that and you wait for the FDA to say take it off the market, you're going to be paying a lot of money in class action lawsuits, right? But if you say, oh my gosh, we identified this early on and we took it off the market, how likely are you to get sued? Because you were being proactive, you're way less likely to get sued. So the drug manufacturers have to ensure that the drugs have the proper strength, identity, purity, and quality. And the FDA will inspect that. There was an outbreak of fungal meningitis a few years ago. Now, you guys have all heard of bacterial and viral meningitis, right? But there was fungal meningitis that they traced back to injectable steroids. So people who were doing joint injections of steroids, if you have really bad tendinitis, they may inject the joint with steroid. Turns out that the manufacturing house was not, there's a proper strength and identity and purity, but the manufacturing house itself was dirty. So things weren't being properly sterilized. And so this fungus was growing in, and you couldn't see it, but the fungus was growing in the bottles because it wasn't properly sterilized. And so anytime a doc gave an injection of that steroid, there was the possibility for fungal meningitis, which is really hard to fight. And bacterial meningitis is bad, but fungal meningitis, it took a few deaths before they realized what it was. It looked like meningitis, but they couldn't find, you do your spinal tap, it's not growing bacteria, it's not viral. And it turns out, it was fungal. And fungus are a lot harder to grow than bacteria or viruses. The drugs have to be identified by color, form, shape, size, and label. So you could take this pill and type the description into Hippocrates and it would come up with what it is. Okay. They also have to have an imprint on them that identifies the manufacturer and what the drug is. They must produce every dose of the same tested strength using the exact formula. We talked about that. If you start tweaking with the formula, you're no longer approved. Over-the-counter drugs, we've all used them, right? Do we have to really dive into over-the-counter drugs too much? No? Okay. Prescription drugs can only be used by order of a licensed healthcare professional. Sometimes, though, a doc will write a prescription out for an over-the-counter drug so the insurance will pay for it. Probably the most common one are prenatal vitamins. You can go buy prenatal vitamins if you want, but if your doc writes you a prescription for it, then the insurance has to pay for it. So there are some over-the-counter drugs that docs can just write for and the insurance will pay for it. It's just one of those loopholes that we figured out. And I'm all about, if I'm paying my $600 a month premium for health insurance, I want you to be paying as much as you can. Okay. The pregnancy categories, we don't, so the clinical trials, I talked about them and said they have to be safe and effective. But babies are pretty precious, and we are not testing drugs on pregnant women. We're just not going to do that, which I think we can all agree on, right? Mm-hmm. There was, without the FDA, or it was actually in the UK, so their version of the FDA is different from ours, but thalidomide babies in the 60s, doctors, so they didn't have the same testing that we did for safety and efficacy. Doctors were prescribing thalidomide for pregnant women to help them sleep. And it turns out it caused major fetal malformations, like babies born with flippers instead of arms, major stuff. So we don't test on pregnant women, right? We might collect data from pregnant women. There are some women who are on, let's say that somebody who's on antipsychotics because they're schizophrenic, they get pregnant. What is more dangerous, them coming off their medication or the slight risk to the baby? Right, so they're going to continue on their medication. So we do have some data that we can take from pregnant women, but we don't purposely expose them in clinical trials. Does that make sense? Okay. We know that some drugs can cause defects to the fetus, and we have categories based on the degree of risk. So category A, the studies show no risk. Are these studies on animals or humans? If it's a controlled study. Animals. Animals, yeah, because we are not taking a pregnant lady and doing this on purpose. Okay. Control B, no evidence of risk in humans, but not animals. Again, we're not putting the humans in the clinical trials. This is all data collected after the fact. Okay. We'll test it on animals. We may have some side effects in animals, but women who've had to continue their medications like an antipsychotic, what we're seeing is that there's no evidence of that risk, but we're still going to be careful about prescribing it. Most drugs fall into category C. The risk cannot be ruled out, but you have to weigh the benefits. Like I said, with the schizophrenic woman, the benefits of her staying on her medication are far higher than the risk of her continuing. We do have some category C where we know that there's a risk, but not doing or not continuing the medication is a higher risk to the mother than to the fetus. And these drugs are very, very few. Most of the time when you're pregnant, we say you don't get anything, right? And then category X, these are, well, so few. We know that it's contraindicated. Accutane is an acne medication, but it is hepatotoxic, kills your liver. So anybody who is on Accutane must have a liver function test drawn every 30 days to continue on it. So we know it's super toxic to the liver. We're not going to give this to a pregnant mom. They're just going to have acne.
Some people just try to get, is this the one you were telling us where some moms are like, oh, my daughter's prom is coming?
Right, I want her on Accutane so she doesn't get zits before her prom. Yeah, it's way too dangerous for that. Accutane works really well for cystic acne, where you get those big old cysts that get infected. It's good for that. But yeah, we did have some parents who wanted their kids on it before prom so they wouldn't have zits for their pictures. Maybelline can take care of the zits.
First world problems.
So first world. But, we would also, a safer alternative is birth control pills. Level out the hormones, the acne goes away, and maybe you don't have a prom baby. But no, that's not how we would sell it to the mom. I'm just saying that. We're not going to sell it to the mom that way.
Why not?
But birth control pills, do tend to even out inflections. So yeah, I would not ever recommend Accutane for that unless it was seriously that bad cystic acne. Okay. Some drugs fall into different categories based on trimester. Like you shouldn't be having ibuprofen early in pregnancy, but in third trimester, it's usually pretty safe. And it's because of the development of the baby, right? When is most development occurring? Most fetal development occurring?
First trimester.
First trimester, yeah. So as we get to the third trimester, what's still developing in the third trimester? The lungs, and then we're gaining weight.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing in the third trimester. So things like ibuprofen in the third trimester tend to be okay because everything's formed. We just are waiting for those lungs to finish cooking. So where do we find the information on the categories? In the PDR, the physician's desk reference. We have a couple in the library. If you want to see them, they're about this thick. They have the entire drug manuscript in them. So it tells you everything you ever wanted to know about the drug, all of the results of the clinical trials, but it's printed on rice paper. So it's, 30,000 pages of very, very thin paper. You can read all of that information on the package inserts. You can go to drugs.com or you can go to Hippocrates. So this little one right here, where am I going to go? Anyway, bottom left, that's a thalidomide baby. So I'm sorry, I'm about the FDA when it comes to this. Can you imagine? Or the cleft palate, I don't know off the top of my head which drug caused the cleft palate. So CAMs, the complementary and alternative medicines, the FDA does not really oversee them. They will release, the only way that the FDA oversees them is that they're not allowed to be sold if they're unsafe. If we know for a fact they're unsafe, we can't sell it. But really, it's such a gray area with the safety and efficacy. We tend to assume that if it's a natural thing, that it tends to be safe. And for the most part, they are, but not always. So the dietary supplements, the herbs, these are completely scientifically unproven. It's all anecdotal evidence. It worked for me and my mom, so it might work for you. They don't have to prove safety and efficacy, but if we know for a fact it's unsafe, you cannot sell it. These are not standardized. They have their own, I think it's a USP seal. A lot of places have a USP seal on their naturopathic stuff. That's self-regulated. So depending on which brand you buy, you may have different concentrations. There's no standardization. So if you buy a doTERRA lavender oil and you buy the Holistic Grocers brand of lavender oil, there's no continuity. We don't know what percentage is actually pure lavender oil and which is, 1 drop of lavender oil in 1 ounce of oil. We don't know. So there's no standards that way. Lots of people like the essential oils thing, and if it works for you, great. Do not ever ingest essential oils. Did you see there was a thing that went around on Facebook, because that's where I get all of my information, but there was a thing about essential oil diffusers and animals. Like, so some of the essential oils that we know, I mean, we know they're toxic to animals. We'd never put them on an animal, but if you put them in a diffuser, the animals are still breathing it in and having some seizures and some toxicity. So people who are like, oh yeah, I would never put that on my dog, still put it in their diffusers, not realizing that their dog breathes the air. Oops. So for all of these alternative medications, the label has to have a disclaimer saying they're not evaluated by the FDA. Have to identify the ingredients. We have to have a quantity, the function claim, what's it supposed to help with. So ginger root is for a calm stomach. And that's the function claim for it. Directions, there should be some supplemental facts. Other ingredients in descending order of predominance of a common name proprietary brand. Did you guys ever, like in high school, learn to read a label? Who had? Nobody has anything commercial. Do you have a wrapper from earlier?
Gum wrapper.
No. So all ingredients are required to be listed. Yeah, it should be on there somewhere. Are required to be listed by the most prominent ingredient or the most common one. So if you look at soda, the number one ingredient, soda is mostly water, followed by caramel color and sugar and whatever. So they start with the ingredient that is most likely to be found and then go all the way down to the least amount. And almost everything is water as their first ingredient. And we have to have some manufacturer information. So we know that drugs are regulated by the FDA. Sources of drug information have to be up to date. So the PDR is the physician's desk reference. We have that big old hump. This is actual size, it's probably 4 inches thick. And it's all on rice paper, so it's very, very thin paper. I think you can still buy the PDR in print form. Ours are probably 10 years old because most of the drug companies have gone to an online PDR. So whatever office you work for can subscribe to the online PDR, which makes it easier to get up-to-date information. So when we had these books, they had to be published every single year. But now if there's updated information on a drug, they can update it in the online PDR and you have the most current information. Hippocrates, which we have, the USP is the official source of drug standards. Really, you're going to pull the information from the PDR or Hippocrates or drugs.com. It's going to have all that USP information in it. There is the AHFS, which is from the hospital pharmacist. He gives the generic names, and then it's organized differently from the PDR. So there's your PDR online. It's super handy. Anybody can access it, but if you want more information, then you have to subscribe to it. So you guys could go to PDR online and look it up, but you're not going to have the same access as if you bought the prescription for like your office. Okay. So the drug insert describes the drug, what it's used for, indications and contraindications, warning, precautions, adverse reactions. Have you guys ever seen an actual drug insert? Not the one they give. So when you go to the pharmacy and you pick up your prescriptions, you get that patient information thing. But there is, if you ask the pharmacist, they probably have them everywhere, a package insert. It's like a 1 inch by 1 inch thing that is like folded like a map because it unfolds to be about 11 by 18 inches. And it's printed in about number 4 font of everything that would be in a PDR is on that package insert. Most of the time patients don't get the package inserts. Usually the pharmacist takes them out and just prints that one patient information sheet. But if you ask them for a package insert, they'll have them. Okay. It just tells you everything you ever wanted to know. all of the results from the clinical trials, all of the side effects, the incidences of the side effects or adverse reactions. So if they say, we talked about earlier that, one of the primary side effects that we hear on TV all the time is suicide. It'll tell you exactly what percentage of patients have had that side effect. Tell you about the drug abuse and dependence, overdose, dosage, administration, how it's supplied. So it gives you all of this. Yes, ma'am.
You can also find them online. I looked up Seroquel. And it told me everything, how long they did the study for, and how many people.
Yeah, it's a lot easier now to do that than it was even 10 years ago because we can just update it online. And drug manufacturers have to produce this information for the PDR, so they might as well put it on their own website. Okay. So again, everything that's in a package insert. A black box warning, not all drugs have black box warnings. Accutane definitely has a black box warning. I believe now Ambien does. I'd have to look it up, but because of the Ambien psychoses, I think they've added a black box warning, but I'm not 100% sure. But it just lets you know about potential life-threatening conditions. With Accutane, kills your liver. So that's definitely got a black box warning. Did you look up Ambien? Just start typing
It just says
Ambien.
on Epocrates, it says this information is currently unavailable or not applicable for this drug or black box warning.
Okay, so it doesn't have a black box warning. We can get information from the drug labels themselves. So if you're working in a pharmacy, this is the label that would be on the drug. Is this the label that is going to go out with the patient? No, this would be on that big bottle that they count their 30 drugs out of. Okay. And it tells us the generic, the trade, the form, the strength, how many are in the container, who the manufacturer is, what lot number it is, when it expires. I just read an article on expiration. I would like to see a full-blown study done, but the military has done studies on expirations of drugs that they use. And it was pretty interesting about how long drugs are good after their expiration date. If you talk to Mike, he'll say about 10 years. And it appears that in the original container stored properly, that's about right. But the military did a study because they buy, the big jugs of ibuprofen, and then they portion it into small packs for people. And it turns out that decreases the length it's good for. I mean, it's good at least up till the expiration date, but they can't guarantee it's good after that. But it was interesting. It was an interesting article to read about that. I think we made it through, guys. Yay. Come on. Oops, that was on so long I locked out. Okay. All right. So we got through lecture 1. On Thursday, we'll do lecture 2. I'll try to keep it short and sweet, and then we will do some practice and some abbreviations. We'll do the practice and the flashcards in class. We'll just do that as some in-class work. You guys can get started on the Learn Smarts, the homework. Your discussion post is the holistic or naturopathic medicine, which is always super interesting. So see what catches your eye on that. And then the quiz is due Saturday. So everything is due Saturday. And we'll work on the in-class stuff on Thursday. Any questions? Nope. Alrighty. Then you're out a few minutes early. All right. I'll see you guys. I'll see you Thursday. I'll see you too, manana.
Sure will. My computer wasn't plugged in this whole time.
Oh,
Why did I do